Hello and welcome, Inspired Podcast community. This is your new episode. My name is Caroline, and my today's guest is Tom Kastle. I'm so happy that you're here. I hope I pronounce your name right.
Oh,
I think.
no, absolutely. It's fine.
Oh, how are you doing today?
Oh, just great, actually.
Oh, yeah, thank you for saying yes. And let me introduce you to the audience. So, you traveled the world collecting, writing, and performing songs of the sea and sailing on talk ships in the Great Lakes. And in the last 8 years, you have been doing theater, ranging from musicals to Shakespeare and some film. And of course, I want to know everything about this.
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey for sure. Yeah, and now that I'm sort of retirement age, I realize that there's no way I can ever retire. So it just keeps going from here.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm so happy to speak to you today. And what inspires you? Tell me about it.
Oh boy, it's funny. I was just listening to a radio program about the Chicago Maritime Museum, and I was uh, part of the group that started that decades ago. And for me, it's history, um, it's adventure, it's the romance of sailing ships and all that kind of thing. I definitely grew up watching Errol Flynn movies and thought, gee, it would be really neat to do something like that. So I ended up being a tall ship sailor and a musician who sang about the Great Lakes, but also about maritime cultures all over the world. And I love it. It just keeps me more and more curious about the world. And then that led me to do all kinds of things in the last decade or two that I never expected to.
Wow, that's very inspiring. Thank you so much for sharing. My next question is, who inspires you?
Ooh. I would say movies and books to begin with, definitely. And then as you get older, you meet more and more characters. And I think actually the biggest inspiration, as my sweetheart will say, Tom's in it for the story. And the story is the thing that I think really drives everything else. If a song has a good story, then it's a good song for me. And if a play or a film tells a good story, then I want to be involved in it. So I think that's really the number one thing. Whoever, when it comes to politics, I say whoever has the best story wins, and I think it's that way through for with life as well.
Oh, yeah. And we also say history is written by the winners. I know it maybe it is related to your topic of story. And I realized when I asked you this and you were answering the question that maybe the questions, is it about the people or about the story? Because I think it depends on the person who narrates the story.
Yeah, and there are people who are just natural storytellers. In Chicago, some of the boat builders and sailors that I met a long time ago are still the ones that I recognize now as inspiring me. That would be Ralph Fries, who was a blacksmith and a canoe builder, and had this place called the Chicagoland Canoe Base. And you could all whenever you stopped at the canoe base, you knew you had to have at least an hour or two because Ralph would start telling stories. And I remember somebody saying, "Oh, I'll just stop over there on my lunch, break." I'm like, "No, you won't. You need at least an hour or two." Um, I was just listening to a radio program about Bill Pinkney, who was the first black man to solo circumnavigate the world, and I had met him back in the '80s. For me, the '80s was really kind of a birthplace for the kind of music and storytelling I was doing and still do because of the people I met playing in Irish pubs in Chicago to begin with, and then later on folk venues and folk festivals, and then in the late '80s I started sailing on an old ship called the Charlotte Ann in Chicago, and she was a Chesapeake Bay oyster boat that was built in 1888, and that's when the hook was set. And I started sailing tall ships, and pretty much sailed all the tall ships in the Great Lakes, and a couple on the coasts here and there as well.
Wow, I love it very much. And I'm also interested in ships and and
Mm.
boats. I would say this, I visited the Titanic Museum in it was Southampton. I know there are other museums as well on not on the other side in Belfast, I think. And I saw a Titanic museum in Los Angeles as well, but
Ah,
it was closed when I was there at that day. And I also visited when you go to Ellis Island, when the immigrants came from, it was a German city and the German people as well. This was inspiring to
mm,
read the passenger lists of all the people. But you are focused on sailing, yes?
mhm.
Hmm. Wow.
Yeah, and of course, immigration and sailing, those go together. You mentioned the Titanic, and I grew up in Chicago, not knowing there was a maritime history there at all. Absolutely no idea until I started sailing, and then I met people who were Ted Karamanski, who was a history professor at Loyola University, and he was really the first person I met who studied Great Lakes maritime history. And we didn't have the Lusitania or the Titanic, but we had the greatest loss of life was actually in the Great Lakes, was in Chicago in 1915, and it was called the Eastland. And the Eastland was an excursion boat. There were somewhere around 1,000 people aboard, and actually nobody knows exactly how many were on because they didn't count like they do today. But they were mostly, and it was a pleasure excursion across the lake, over 100 miles, and it was mostly immigrants who worked at the Western Electric plant in Chicago. And through this entire story, the boat capsized at the dock, which doesn't seem like a big disaster, but over 800 people were killed.
Mm.
And because the immigrant families all tended to stay together, 22 entire families were wiped out that day at the dock. And if you go down to Clark Street in Chicago along the Chicago River, you can see a plaque for that. And the Maritime Museum has a little bit of an exhibit on that as well. And the thing is, so my old partner and I wrote a song about it. And wherever we would travel, we would meet someone who knew somebody who was on the Eastland, almost on the Eastland, or had some connection to that story, all the way from the East Coast to Colorado. I remember meeting people whose great aunt or uncle or someone was involved in it somewhere. Um, so, a single event, a single story can actually has this big web that goes out and affects so many people's lives. It's an amazing, amazing thing.
Wow, I love what you said also about history, and yeah, and to meet people who were involved. Wow, this is so amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. And my next question is, how do you inspire other people? Of course, by storytelling. What else?
I think so. Yeah, and the thing is about music, the power of music is really interesting, and or actually any creative art. There can be a visual piece that you see that evokes incredible feelings and stuff like that. One of my favorite things is going to the Art Institute in Chicago and looking at paintings, by the masters that I saw when I was 6 years old, 16 years old, 60 years old, and even though it's the exact same image, your experience with it changes. I think it's that way with songs as well, and music has a profound impact on people. And one of the things I do during the day, my day gig, my day job, is I do a lot of singing in libraries and nursing homes and assisted living places. And I have seen people start singing a song and they haven't spoken in 2 years.
Mm.
I think everybody who works with memory care people have a similar experience. I remember I was playing my concertina one time, and um, and a resident came up and punched me in the shoulder and said, "I like that instrument." And the staff were just freaking out. And I thought they were freaking out because she hit me, but they were freaking out because she hadn't spoken in years. And there's something about music that turns keys in people's heads, and I've seen it lots of times, especially with certain songs that all of a sudden someone who looks totally out of it will all of a sudden sit up and just start singing. uh, it's amazing. It's my
Oh.
one of my favorite things ever.
Oh yes, I witnessed a story as well. My mom used to tell, and it was when she went with French friends from France to the German Oktoberfest, and the people were not speaking German, but there was one song coming up. They played, and the one person from France started to sing with this song, the original text in German, and nobody knew, but after that, he told them that it was his mother also singing this song. It was in the World War. I don't know. Yeah, this is exactly what you said. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yep. The songs bring people together.
Wow.
um I think the scene in Casablanca where you do the Marseillaise, that was it hits me every time. And I've been part of the protest sings in Madison. Back in 2011, there was a horrible law that was passed that took away public workers' rights, and it inspired a protest that went on for 3 months, and it was anywhere from 10,000 to 110,000 people every day. And we put together this group called the Solidarity Sing Along. And it was just a bunch of people who just met each other at the Capitol. And it ended up being this group that I've sang with at least 600 times, I would say. And they're threatened with actually 400 arrests over a couple of years. And through that, I met all kinds of people that I never thought I would meet, and I got to play with Holly Near and Jackson Brown and Tom Morello, um, and I got to sing shoulder to shoulder with Masha from Pussy Riot in Russia. Um, these incredible people that I'm still meeting because of that experience. And the people that were down there were not all folk singers. There were rock and roll people. There were opera singers. There were one guy who plays a fiddle in a klezmer band. They're operatic tenors. And there was also a whole marching band that started called the Forward Marching Band that's still going today. And it was an amazingly creative time. The visual artists were making political figures that were 9 and 10 feet high. There was theater going on. It was an amazing time. I think that's why in certain places they always go after the artists first.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Relate to this because I watched I don't know how you call it, but protest people. I watched them in the internet, and they were just shouting and yelling at the other people with their what they wanted to protest for or against. I didn't get it, but when you say you use music to express your rights or what you want to change, then it's the best way. It reaches people.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. There's a and call and response chants are also part of that tradition. And I took one. Um, I'll send you a link to it, but it's there was a chant that was when it comes to the Capitol. They call the Capitol the People's House in Madison, and it was the exact opposite of January 6th. It was absolutely peaceful, and it took and it was over the course of 3 months, not just one day. And it was a really inspirational thing to see. And also, it spawned a lot of activity. There's a young girl I met, Lydia, who was running a campaign for a friend of mine, and she had two successful campaigns, a primary and a general election, and she wasn't old enough to vote yet. And I said, "Why are you doing this?" And she said, "When I was in sixth grade, my mom took me down to the protests and I got inspired." And now she's traveling the world. She's studying political science. She's studying international relations. And it's all because she got inspired by a certain activity and felt motivated. And it was just absolutely amazing. And there are dozens of people like that just in Madison, so I can imagine what it's like in other places in the world.
Wow, I love what you just said. Maybe you can connect me with her and she could be in another episode of this podcast. It would be very
I'll do that. I'll do that.
Thank you so much. So my next question is, do you have a goal for 2024 or do you set intentions?
Um, it's funny. I actually, along the way, I ended up with a planning degree, which I'd never used, but because my whole life is just serendipity. Um, but when I moved to Madison about 15 years ago, I decided I wanted to hit the reset button and do all kinds of things I wish I had done in the past, like take voice lessons, study music theory, and do things like that. And I remember that was the beginning of really setting goals besides projects, because making an album is a goal. But in general, I really didn't have too many uh, life goals. Uh, but I really wanted to do is I wanted to make an album I was really proud of, and I wanted somebody I was in theater with to say, "Oh, Tom Kastle, he's a good actor." Because I always wanted to be an actor but never did. So that was that was a 2-year goal, which I did. And then I always wanted to do a one-man play. And I'm writing a play about a Great Lakes pirate by the name of Dan Seavey. And he is quite the character. I have actually met people who had met him, though he died in 1947. Um, and I wanted to do that, but I was always afraid to try to do a one-man show of my own because I didn't have the acting experience. And then a friend, David Simmons from Fermat's Last Theater Company, asked me to do a one-man play about the labor organizer Joe Hill. And we thought we would do it. He wrote it. I helped with the music part. And we were going to do it one time. That's it, just one time, and then reassess. But there was a guy in the audience from the Labor Temple, and he asked us to bring the production there. There was a guy in that audience from the University of Akron in Ohio, and we brought it there. And now I've done it in Chicago, Michigan State University, and um, 4 other places. And I'm going to the Woody Guthrie Center in Tulsa in August. And I have a touring play just because I said yes. And it is a huge challenge because I'd never done anything like that before. Um, I play musical sets that go for hours, but not with this exact same dialogue all the time. So it was a challenge, and now I'm looking forward to doing even more of that. So we might be on tour next year. We'll see.
Oh, I love that very much. We will put the links in the show notes, I assume, that you have a link, your website, etc. So I have one last question for you, and it is when people reach out to you, and they will after listening to this podcast episode. mm, do you have special offers or services, or how can they support you?
Well, I do have a Patreon page, and
Mhm.
it's just patreon.com/Tom Kastle, Kastle. And just coming to a show. I'm not making CDs that commercially, what I've started to do in the last 2, 3 years is I have different recordings I make, and I just put them out at live performances. And the only way you can get right now, I might be doing a new one in the next year or so, but for right now, come to a show, become a Patreon patron, or go to the Chicago Maritime Museum in Chicago, and my recordings are there as well. So, and write to me. It's just tom@tomkastle.com.
It's easy. Thank you so much for sharing. Please reach out to Tom. He's amazing. And if you have one last message to our audience, this would be amazing.
I would say, I kind of said something about yes, just say yes. And there is I'll give you a link to a thing called My Classical Story. The last thing in the world I thought I would ever do is sing opera. And I ended up taking lessons from a Romanian opera singer who asked me to narrate some operas. And I thought it was so nice to be the narrator. But I thought, boy, maybe if I could actually be in an opera. And a couple of years later, I was Frosch in Die Fledermaus. So who knows? And the whole thing is that just say yes, because the worst thing that can happen is you'll fall apart a little bit, but you'll have an experience that you wouldn't have had otherwise. So just say yes.
I love that so much, and I feel that you are adventurous like I am. I like having first times, or I'm collecting first times. I love doing things for the first time, never never again. But the diversity or the new things, the outside comfort zone, and the experience is worth it. This is what life is for. Thank you so much for our interview. Wow. Thank you.
Thank
And
you, Caroline.
in the next episode.